care for. And then there suddenly appeared before me the only one my arms will ever hold. I heard somebody whisper, please adore me. And when I looked, the moon had turned to gold. Blue moon, now I'm no longer alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.
Everybody that's got a collection really thinks that their collection is the best, and it's the most important. This stuff is important. This is America. This is America's history. America's art history is what this is. Like, it's the doorway through which abstract art snuck into America's culture. You had all the modern artists out there fighting a very tough uphill battle to get people to go into a museum and accept abstraction. People went to the museum, they wanted to see careful renderings of the world they could see out their window, or better yet, out the window they couldn't look out of because it was in some wonderful, fabled, faraway land, or famous people or something, but they wanted realism. And modern art had a real tough time getting them to accept abstraction. Many a thousand persons say, what the heck is that supposed to be? And yet, beginning at the turn of the century, abstract imagery was embraced by the world, embraced by Americans. They just let comic characters enter their lives willingly, and there was no one ever said, well, this doesn't look like a real human being. People don't realize it's art. They don't, because it's not been presented that way, because it's not been reproduced, enlarged. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Roy Lichtenstein was great and whatever, but any 10-year-old kid who read comic books could tell anyone that was interested that this was great art.
I'm yours completely, from my head to my toes. Every part of me knows that I'm yours. I'm yours. Every time that you speak, I begin to get weak in the knee.
Okay, well, this is Gus White's Punchin' comic family, and it's probably the most amazing object here in Mouse Heaven. At first glance, you might think it's not related to all these comic characters. Actually, it's probably the origin of all these comic characters. When the world was first discovering abstract imagery, just about the first to appear was Punch and Judy. And this incredible object behind me was created by a 17-year-old young man right across the river in Goshen, New York. He went to a county fair in 1878, saw a Punch and Judy show, and came out saying, I can do better than that. He went home and built a theater, carved these puppets out of wood, and for the next 50 years, he traveled across the East Coast of the United States performing Punch and Judy shows. And this is clearly the ultimate American Punch and Judy. And he transformed the English characters into American ethnic stereotypes. So the classic characters that you'll find in the English show here are translated into various immigrant types: an Irish washerwoman, a Jewish peddler, a Chinese laundryman, an Irish cop. Well, of course, not everyone knows the story of Punch and Judy, and it's traditional. It goes back hundreds of years. But it's quite amazing because it's quite unlike any story that anyone would present to children. But it is for children and adults, and it drove the crowd crazy with delight over the centuries. And Punch is a total scoundrel. And the plot simply consists of him murdering one person after another. He starts out, well, traditionally there would even be a dog in the act, often a live dog that would sit on the border of the stage. It started out with him beating the dog to death. And then he would beat his own baby to death. Then he would beat his wife, Judy. And then he would encounter one character after another and do them in one unique way after another. So the props that come with this have everything from a straight razor to a hangman's noose to many forms of murder implements. But in this version that Gus White created, everyone ends up in the sausage grinder. And they come out as individual links of sausage. Ultimately, he meets up with everybody, including the executioner, who he executes, and he meets up with the devil, and he bests the devil too. In the end, Punch is triumphant over everything. He's murdered everybody in the cast, and that's the end. Was like a real innovator and an inventor as well. He was a small man. He was only 5 foot tall. And he stood behind this puppet theater holding these puppets aloft for hours. And they weigh 10 pounds each, easily. And he was also an incredible, well, you can see from what you've seen, he's an incredible artist. But he was also a quick sketch artist. And he fitted Punch with a holder that would hold a piece of charcoal. And he would do portraits of famous people. So Punch would be on the stage drawing these portraits up above his head. And he had a peephole in the curtain. And Punch would do portraits of people in the audience. I mean, it's hard enough to draw with a piece of paper right in front of your face on the table, but try looking through a hole and drawing up there. But he did it, and it was an incredible part of the show. Okay, well, what we're looking at here is the ticket booth, which is also built to carry the puppets. This little thing would come out, they'd sell the tickets here, 10 cents. But one of the most crazy things about Gus White is when he first started with his puppets, his first performance, he passed a hat around and he didn't make any money. And then he figured out, I'll charge 10 cents ahead of time. And suddenly he was making a living. Here's 3 of the puppets, and this last one in the center, Happy Hooligan, was the link to comic characters. If Punch and Judy were the predecessors to the comic character, well, here they joined forces. And in 1905, Happy Hooligan joined the troupe. And he ultimately was the last puppet to join them. Might well be the oldest thing in my collection, actually. And it's also the most glorious. I mean, this is a national treasure. And it's a tremendous responsibility to be the custodian of it. Well, Gus's great-nephew, Harold White, was given these puppets when he was 9 years old. Gus had died like 2 years beforehand, but they went to Harold. And I guess Harold had seen the puppets performed one time in his life. Harold cherished these puppets, played with them as a kid, cared for them all of his life long. And as the story goes, when Harold was like 10 years old, Walt Disney came to Goshen, New York. And I think he used to summer in the Adirondacks or something. But he came through and he saw these puppets. And he offered to buy them. He said they were the best Punch and Judy he'd ever seen. Harold wouldn't sell them. God, when I was 10 years old, Disney wanted anything from me. You got to have it. You take them, it's a gift. But Harold wouldn't sell them. And so here, all these years later, they end up here surrounded by Walt Disney collectibles. There's a certain irony there. But it was auctioned on a rainy night over in Walden, New York, and it was a grand and glorious event, and we were determined that I was going to have this thing and save it from the full cart dealers who were there pooling their resources, who would have bought the stuff and then split it up and divided it amongst them. So here it is complete, and Harold White, who really didn't want to auction it, but was ill and thought it was time to do that, he was thrilled that I got it. Because for me, it was just visual. I could look at these things and visually I could see this was simply incredible. So the fact that it was the best in the world or the oldest in America, all that, it was only an annoyance in a certain sense because it was going to make it that much more difficult to obtain. The visual was everything. It was nothing to do with what it happened to be, its age or what it represented. I just fell in love with the imagery of it, the way it looked, like everything in this collection.
'Cause I know that I can't resist you. I'm a coward to say you affect me this way, but you do. I can't resist you.
When I first started collecting comic characters, naturally I didn't know who most of them were. And then I found this amazing book by a man named Louis Biederman. And he worked for King Features Syndicate. And I think he was on the staff of the newspaper. And this is probably an assignment handed him. He was a fabulous artist. He did reporting of realistic scenes. He's a person who came from a time before there were cameras. And an artist was required to capture anything you wanted to show in a newspaper. Well, he had that kind of training. So he could draw actual situations with incredible accuracy. And here they handed him comic characters. And he created this book that's simply extraordinary. It includes all of the comic characters of its day. It says it's an adventure story. It's all written in rhyme. And it's about a great race between Maud the mule and Sparkplug the horse. And then I found this incredible object. Obviously, the success of the book found him commissioned every year to do a calendar for King Features. And this is the only known example of that. So this object hung here in the hallway for the last 45 years. And I guess slowly fading, but I just couldn't stand not to be looking at it all the time. There are comic strips to tear off for each week of the year. And there was a wheel back here that changed the scenes. They're looking at the earliest form of television before there was television. This was 1928. Okay, the second calendar consists of 4 pages. Intricate, full-colored scenes, again, with all the comic characters in them. This is also a rare object, as 2 of these are known. This is 1926. So it's enough to make you crazy because you know there was a 1928, and you know there was a 1929, and you know, well, the 28 is over there, so you know there's a 27. This is probably the first one because the book was 26 too, so this is what he did the year he did the book. And then there's a 29. And there's a 30, and the only reason I know the 30 is because of the art in the other room. Lo and behold, suddenly appeared this original art. I mean, this is what it looked like to begin with. He drew those images huge. These are original pen drawings for a calendar which I would guess is definitely going to be 1930, because that was the year that Mickey Mouse was first picked up by King Features Syndicate, and obviously Louis Biederman had not figured, he hadn't got the ears down quite right. And so this has got to be the 1930 calendar, and it represents 4 pages of what must have been 12 pages of traveling around the world. And it boggles the mind what those other subject matter might have been. I spent hours imagining what it could have been. They turned up in a toy auction. And I went absolutely nuts and bid over the telephone for the first time I ever bid on the telephone. And when I got them, the auctioneer brought them to me at one of Noel Barrett's auctions in Pennsylvania. So I drove down there just to pick up these. One of the many incredible things about these is the amazing penmanship, because it's big, it's larger than life. You see something that's probably Amsterdam or Germany or someplace like that, and they're having a bicycle race. Felix is racing with Mickey through the town. There's a Katzenjammer Kids, the Captain, Jiggs and Maggie. And in the background, you see the realistic artistry of Louis Biederman. I mean, he was a super great artist. And suddenly into these incredible drawings of the real world, he puts these comic characters. So here's a scene very strange scene that's taking place, probably in Mexico. And I'm guessing it from the various sombreros and things they're wearing. There's a Katzenjammer kid's being carried off by some kind of a giant parrot, and Mom and Papa Katzenjammer are chasing after it with a grappling hook. In this huge size, you have to marvel at the penmanship. These cross-hatching, these gray tones that he creates are done with such amazing uniformity. If one of those lines was a little tiny bit closer to the one adjacent to it, it would create a dark blotch. So what were the other 8 panels like? I can only wonder and wish they would turn up again.
I can't resist you. When I'm looking at you, you can practically do as you please. I'm yours completely. From my head to my toes, every part of me knows that I'm yours.
I never thought I'd own a Bil Baird puppet, but God, when I was a kid, I fantasized about it. I thought if I could have a Bil Baird puppet, my life would be complete. And I'll never forget the day that I first laid my eyes on Bil Baird's work and his artistry and his puppetry. And I was 10 years old. Well, he was a god to me. He was like Disney. I had 2 gods in my youth. They were Disney and Bil Baird. And I first encountered him at Hampton Elementary School. And on Friday afternoons, we would see movies. And they were usually government surplus. I saw some wonderful films. I saw the 7 Dwarfs fighting malaria mosquitoes and trips to the dentist where you learned that there were germs in your teeth and you had to clean them and all crazy. And they were made by Disney. They were quite amazing. But on this particular afternoon were 2 films by Bil Baird. And they were engineered to teach children how to properly use the telephone. And in particular, one was called Party Line. And it was to teach you how to be polite with your party line, because in those days you were sharing the telephone with neighbors. And they're showing these 2 short films by Bil Baird, each about 10 minutes each. And one was called Adventures in Telezonia, and that was a story about a kid that travels to a land of telephones. And there's puppet characters who are telephones, and they travel along the lines, and they see people using the phone and misusing the phone, and one caller is hogging the line and turns into a pig. And I had never seen anything as marvelous as these puppets. Well, they were so mind-boggling, I could swear they were changing their facial expressions. Well, what string do you pull to turn a smile into a frown? But I thought I saw that happening. And they were so incredibly awesome. I'd never seen anything like it. I was absolutely starstruck with it. So I was not a brave kid, and I was a pretty shy kid. But I did something so brazen. When they cleared our group out of the auditorium, I dove behind the seats and hid there. And when the next crowd came in, and they would have like 3 or 4 showings until the whole school got to see the films, I just popped up again, and I saw the film 3 times that day. The 2 films, 3 times each. And I was absolutely mesmerized by Bil Baird and those puppets. Then he appeared on television. In the early days of television, he had a show called Life with Snarky Parker. And the co-star was Snarky Parker's horse, Heathcliff. And here he is. Heathcliff is right here now. And people today don't know who Bil Baird was. It's a name they've never heard of until you say to them, "His were the puppets in The Sound of Music." And then they remember that. So over here across the room, we have Elsie the Borden Cow and Elmer and Beauregard, and those were created for a series of TV commercials from the 50s. Here's a string that operates her eyes. This beautiful close tolerances, you'd never even guess they were going to move. And I love this motion here where her wrist rotates so she can actually pour the milk. And there's little Beauregard. And you can see that Elmer can move his business too. Look at the beautiful way the legs are articulated. Very complex joining and stringing. Again, you'll see more of the heads and things downstairs. I discovered why I was imagining they were changing expressions, because they were pulling the puppets off camera and changing the heads. And they're created in such a way that it's very quick to take the head off, clip it back on, clip a different head, clip in more. I saw Bil Baird's son, Peter Baird, doing that very thing at the Bil Baird auction. And they can change a head and change a body part and do anything in a split second. But Baird's puppets moved with a magic buoyancy. They kind of floated in a funny kind of way, and they had wrist actions, and they did stuff like that. And their feet like lifted up. It was like they flew. They were amazing. These are all wood, and the heads are, most of the time, they're made of plastic wood, which means they're made of clay and then cast in plaster, and then the mold is filled with plastic wood. Okay, here she is, folks, Bubbles LaRue, and you can see for yourself that she's absolutely incredible. And every string you pull does something seductive or erotic. Like that. And this amazing motion here. You ever seen a marionette that does anything like that? Here is her little, this is her bump and grind string. And some strings in here that effectively do something like that. And she also... There's no motion here. There's no posing in her ankles or anything, because she was meant to just do a certain thing and nothing else, which was basically disrobe. And when she had removed all of her garments, one after the other, she finished off by taking one more thing off. Well, can you guess what that might be? No, you're wrong. It was actually her head. And there was a latch that dislocated her neck. I can't do it now because it's too hard to get back on again. And then her hands went up and lifted her head up above her shoulders. This was for a nightclub act. So the strings aren't so tall up. He was able to stand there and work her right on the ground in front of him. There's little hook eyes in the palms of her hands, and her various clothing articles would be carried through a string, so she could sort of do this and pull off something and then kind of drop it, and it would fall to the floor but remain there. And then when she'd taken off all that, she would take off her head.
That bluebird is still on your windowsill. Help yourself to happiness, and happiness will help you too.
As a kid, I collected one thing. It were Disney images called Evan Shaw figurines, these ceramic figurines. And I was pretty much obsessed with that, but there wasn't a lot to be obsessed because the total output of the company over a period of years is probably 50 pieces or something like that. And yeah, I was obsessed with them. When we go out for a ride in the car, I was like, my face was at the window like a dog looking for other dogs. I thought any minute I'm going to pass the store, and I'm going to see these figurines in that store and find another place that sold them. But there was actually, by 7, I realized there was only one place in Detroit that sold these things. But I was obsessed with them. And when I was 8 years old, we're passing that store one day, and there in the window was Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. They were the most beautiful ones. Oh, my God, gorgeous. They were really good. They were as good as the Disney character models. And I went nuts. I had to have these for my birthday. It was coming up. Drove my parents crazy. Well, there was only one store in Detroit that carried these things, and they only ever got one set, and I'd figured that out. So I started working on my parents, and I'd learned, to be the nicer I was, the more I got. Being obnoxious didn't get me anything, but, really. Well, one day I'm passing the store again, obsessed with it. We were 2 blocks away. I come running down the street towards it, and the closer I got, the more it was becoming clear to me they were gone. They weren't in the window, and I was hysterical. My heart really was literally broken. I cried myself to sleep every night for like a week. But they were the focal point of at 8 years old, they were the focal point of my life. It was life or death for me. I was convinced I was going to die if I didn't get these. Oh, you're laughing. It's so true. It's ridiculous. My parents finally took pity on me, and I swear to God, they said, come on, get up. Stop crying. They led me to the hall closet, and there, my birthday's still 2 weeks away. There on the top shelf is a box, a big one, a big cardboard, brown corrugated box. They said, there they are. You're not getting them to your birthday now. For God's sake, stop crying. Go back to bed. I mean, it's ridiculous. Well, I swear to God, I was so elated. I mean, I wrote about it on the website, and I wasn't exaggerating when I say my heart literally flew up to those things. And I parked it there for safekeeping. And the wait for them, was the wait agonizing? No. The wait was exquisite. The anticipation, I discovered the exquisite, delicious joys of anticipation. And I savored every moment I waited for them. And then when I finally got them, and I unwrapped them, each one, they were everything I dreamed they would be. Oh, they were awesome. This is the rarest of all Mickey books, or at least the most desirable. Certainly the most awesome. This amazing book, well, if you could read the flyleaf, it just tells it all. It's the book where the characters come out and walk. Simply the rarest of the rare. And it's an awesome book produced by Blue Ribbon Books. The artwork is incredible. The line work is amazing. And the most amazing thing about it is that the characters punch out and then they literally walk down the ramp. And works to its simplest of means. 1934, it was made for 1 year. And in terms of rarity, these things to come out complete with the little metal hinges, with the ramp, with everything there, with the dust jacket, with the wrapper that held the envelope in place that the ramp and the parts came in. There's not many of these around. And if you find one that's unpunched, well, that is even more amazing still. And there's probably 3 or 4 of them now known that are not punched out in perfect condition. It's part of the series of Blue Ribbon Books that did all the pop-up books too. And those pop-up books, there's so much more there than meets the eye. They all had original patents. In fact, I saw the patent for this long before I actually saw the actual book. But the pop-ups, too, were all patented. And they actually developed their own special paper for those. So it was just stiff enough without being too heavy and would bend again and again without breaking. I mean, they're all quite extraordinary. And the artist who did all of them, the pop-up books and the waddle book, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So the waddle book became the culmination of the pop-up books. But here you go back to the 1930s, and all the graphics were great. And they were never better than they were in the Blue Ribbon Books. But there's many, many books where they were, books and toys and everything, where the graphics were incredible. I grew up not knowing any of this stuff. So as an adult, when I discovered it, I discovered this other world where extraordinary graphics were not only commonplace, they were the norm, they were to be expected. But then there were a couple of very deluxe volumes that had ordinary end papers, but 3 glorious full-bodied pop-ups, maybe 4, I may be mistaken on that, in the book itself. The way the book was structured was special, because it had to be able to be a book this thick and yet fold flat. So each pop-up could fully fold up. So it was unique. It was done then, and it's never been done again in the same way. It was a company that came into existence for a few years and then disappeared. Certainly they were gone when I became the age to look at books. I never knew such a thing existed.
I've tried to stop fate, but now know that I can't resist you. I'm a coward to say you affect me this way, but you do. I can't resist you.
I got to meet Sonny Hatfield at an Allentown toy show, and I had driven all night long. I had hired a booth so I could look like a dealer, so I could be there for the opening. So I'm at the show, and I've got my little booth there, and I never would unpack. I would just use this 2 hour of unpacking time to be running around as everyone else is unpacking. So here I am at the heat of the show, and one person after another is coming up to me and saying, Mel, you got to go out in the parking lot. There's a guy out there you just got to meet. I said, I can't. I get the show started. I'm running around and booth. You got to, please go to the parking lot. So I go out, and there's Sonny Hatfield sitting there at a card table with some of his toys. And he wasn't there to sell a thing. He was just there to show them off, because he was so childlike and so outgoing and he just wanted to show them and just be at the show. Well, it was an instant meeting of the minds. It was incredible. And he was just beginning to consider selling some of these things, but I got to him just the right way, because I offered to trade him toys for it, and he loved toys. And so while he successfully sold a lot of these along the line and actually got decent money for them, we never exchanged money. It was always, I would trade him toys. Sonny would describe them as a toy. He would call them toys. To him, they were always toys. To me, they were kinetic sculptures. To me, they were works of art and works of insane ingenuity. They all animate, and what they do is absolutely unique. The mechanism I've seen inside some of them, it's pure insanity. It would put Rube Goldberg to shame, what's going on inside those boxes. And they all work by turning a single crank. But I have to say, there's nobody on earth that could turn that crank the way Sonny did. He knew the right speed for every motion, the right speed for every toy. Each one had a certain pace that it had to hit. And when he'd get it just right, he'd get that horse running along there at a gallop. Little Pluto would be jumping around inside that cart like to beat the band, looking at everything. Mickey would be bouncing on the seat. And then we'd go over to another one like the music group, and that was a different motion, and he would turn that crank to perfection. And they'd all play their various instruments in rhythm to the band, and Minnie would rotate on the piano, and Pluto would beat that drum with his tail, and Mickey would bounce away on the piano seat, would be dancing. The piano itself is dancing. And Clarabelle, it was totally mysterious, and Sonny didn't himself know how he did it. Just through bending the wire a certain way, everybody was tied into following the beat, but Clarabelle would raise her songbook, open her mouth, and she would hold the note through several beats, and then unerringly shut her mouth again, pick it up, and sing again. And what made that work, I can't figure out, and neither could Sonny, but it did. It was just sheer, subtle magic. He was an extraordinary person, a happy-go-lucky person. He had been a pilot in the Korean War. Well, his name was Sonny Hatfield. I failed to mention that. And he was a direct descendant of the Hatfields and McCoys. And he was also, at one time, the mayor of his small town. He also built a restaurant and his house from scratch. He also created an antique mall. And he had a wonderful toy collection, but there were no toys. As Sonny was often told me, there were absolutely no toys on the earth as good as the ones he make himself. He says, you know, Mel, I love toys. I've seen a lot of toys, but there are no toys I've ever seen as good as the ones I make myself. I mean, that's how, but you know what? He was right. You know, it wasn't just idle boasting. He was absolutely right. His toys he made were simply wonderful. This is really Sonny's masterpiece. And the action here is absolutely incredible. And Clarabelle is amazing. Everything's moving to a beat, except Clarabelle. She opens her mouth to sing the note and holds it. And it continues over several beats. And he's dancing on the piano, and the piano itself is dancing. This is a very, very gentle one, but see, she does a little dance, even though it's one rod. She does a little hop, and then she swings around. I can make her go all the way around if I crank this way. Okay, here we go. I love Pluto. You know those kind of dogs, when you're taking them for a ride, they gotta see everything. So check him out. He's looking around. He's not gonna miss anything. Okay. You get this horse going just right. Sonny knew how to do it. Let me see if I can do it. This is actually a Disney character, the Cannibal Chief from Trader Mickey. And Sonny showed me one of these he made, and I said, Sonny, will you make me one? Sure, of course, Mel. So he made it, but he put that guy in his head.
When I'm in your arms, I've tried to stop fate, but now it's too late. So I don't even try, 'cause I know that I can't resist.
Well, these are the bisque comic nodders. They're called nodders. It's really a misnomer. They were not intended to nod, but when they first came out, which was like 70 years ago now, those heads were on elastic, and they were meant to be posable. And over the years, the elastic loosened up, and by the time they became collectible, they were all tending to nod. So they've been misnamed nodders. They're all made in Germany. They first appeared about 1928. And they really ran through all the going funny paper families, all the characters that appeared in the comic strips in those days, in family groupings, and some of the groupings get quite large. Down along this end, you get the very first of them, and they were just beginning. And there was a series of 4 figures, and one of them had a movable head. Then we got into a group of characters like Mutt and Jeff and Jiggs and Maggie and Dinny Moore, and their heads were permanent, but they were turned to one side. And then next we come to Happy Hooligan, and his head turned. And that is like the Rosetta Stone of the Nodders. That's the transition point. From that point on, they all had movable heads. Apart from their incredible dead-on likenesses, is their absolutely extraordinary silhouettes, the abstract silhouettes of them. The way when you place one next to the other, they're so essentially contrastingly amazing, almost geometric. Well, that was one of the things that was so exciting about it, because nobody knew who existed and what families. So it was only through a group of fellow collectors and myself who discovering another and yet another and yet another that we discovered just how many there actually were and how complete the families were. And in the process, it was discovered that certain characters who seem at first glance inconsequential were extremely rare and hard to find. So certain of these figures became very, very, very choice. This little figure here of Jossie, she was practically impossible to find. The excitement of discovering them is all there, and then when you've got them all, that's it. It's over. And so there's no place else to go. It's one of the double-edged swords of collecting. The fact that you're hot to have it all, you're rushing to complete it, and then when you're completed, you've come to the end of it. That, in a sense, is why I was so rewarded collecting comic characters, and Mickey Mouse especially, because there was no end to it. You could go on forever and forever and forever. what I've come to call geometric celluloids really were one of my secret passions. And I was very careful to keep it a secret because I kept the prices down. Unfortunately, we got to a part where there were a lot of fellow collectors who kept a sharp eye out to my likes. I kept this a secret, and whenever I would come across one of these, I would buy it secretly, I would keep it hidden, and I wouldn't show it to anybody, because I didn't want to influence anybody's taste, because I loved this stuff and it was still affordable. Look, what we're talking about here is that hidden in all the best comic characters is pure geometry. Underneath Mickey's black and white pelt is a toy like this, is an image like this. Pure geometry. And here's the geometry without the surface niceties. This is it. This is these incredible objects all put together from purely geometric shapes. But it's a wild group of colors. And the factory that produced these would do endless variations by changing pieces to the point that they could create everything. And there are comic characters among them reduced to their geometric essence. There's a Mickey Mouse thing that's still Mickey. Some of them are extraordinary. The delicacy of this little figure riding on a horse, the intricacy of it. Some of them are wind-up toys. This fellow here on the ball with the banjo, he rocks back and forth. Or others spin wildly in carousel motions. And one of the first I ever found, and I don't know if you can see it from where you're located, is that Santa Claus with the reindeer. I found that at the Stormville Airport Flea Market. It's just a perfect sculpture. And the perfect essence of it's lyrical, the flow of it, the delicacy of it. And that's the original box it's standing on. To some people, they look all the same, but to me, each one is a movement in a great celluloid fugue, where every variation is interesting.
Completely. Every time that you speak, I begin to get weak in the knees. I try to be strong.
I was 20 years old at the Paris Flea Market, and I would go there on a Sunday, and suddenly there, amidst this ocean of ancient artifacts, and I mean ancient artifacts. Here in the United States, we have no concept of what ancient is. I mean, our history begins 200 years ago. In France, you're staying in a building that's 200 years old. All around you are things from centuries ago. And the flea market is ancient stuff. So here amidst these ancient artifacts is suddenly this glowing image of Mickey Mouse that stands out like a beacon of light. And it said to me, well, this is a sculpture. But it was also Mickey Mouse. I mean, Mickey Mouse represented my childhood, which I was struggling, failing dismally, at setting behind me. I was trying very hard to be grown up. And then suddenly I find myself compelled to this icon that represented youthfulness. But I stared at it for an hour and decided this is a piece of art. This is true art. So what if it's Mickey Mouse? I will overcome that fact. And I will swing for $10, which seems ludicrously cheap. But that was a lot of money then. My hotel room was $30 a week. So $10 was like, several days hotel rent. It was like a week's worth of meals, $10. But I bought this thing, and when I bought it, the discovering of it, the realization that it was art, was like creating art. This object is called the Buck Rogers Cutout Adventure Book, and it's not really a book, it's a whole theater. And this incredible, gorgeous Technicolor extravaganza was actually given away free. And in order to get it, the kid had to testify that he drank cocoa malt once a day for 30 days, and then he had to get his parents to sign an affidavit swearing that he was telling the truth. And when you've sworn all of these things and verified it, and I don't think you had to take it to a certified public accountant, but they trusted you enough to send you this absolutely free. And I mean, there were many premiums that you could send away for that cost a dime, or some even 15 cents, but this was free, and it was the best of all of them. And it's the artwork here, I'm convinced, is superior to the actual drawings by the man who created Buck Rogers, Dick Hawkins. Well, he was a hired artist. He didn't actually create it himself. And his drawings weren't as good as these are. But recently, a few of these have turned up uncut in the original book like that. They've gone for quite a lot of money at auctions. And they're advertised as complete. But they're not complete. They're never complete. The thing that makes this complete is that cardboard theater. And so the book and the things, that's just the scenery. The stage is what makes it complete. And I don't know of another one. Oh, they came together. When you sent for this, you got it in a big envelope, and you got the cardboard theater, and you got the book that contained the plays and the characters. I've seen a photograph of one years and years ago, but I've never heard of another one since. And so this is cut out, but it's cut out by somebody with such incredible skill. This was to think that some kid cut these things out with a pair of scissors when I don't think I could do as good a job with an X-Acto knife. So it's miraculous for several reasons. The awesome way it was cut out, the completeness, the fact that it was cut out and it's still all there, and the fact that it's got that incredible stage, which many a collector doesn't even realize existed. What's there, center stage, front and center, is the Buck Rogers pocket watch, and of all the comic timepieces, that has to be one of the most delicious. It has that beautiful faux color image on the dial. And the hands are actually lightning bolts. And on the back is engraved this wild outer space one-eyed monster. And the box itself is a gorgeous object.
I can't resist you. When I'm looking at you, you can practically do as you please. I'm yours.
These probably are my favorite thing, no doubt about it. They're simply extraordinary. I got them really. You know, for all the years of running around to flea markets and being the first in every antique show and doing everything I could to get in shows early and hedging my bets the best I could to get an advantage, always to find great stuff, these things just fell out of the sky. They just came to me from fate alone. There was an article in Americana magazine, and I can't remember how that came about, but it was like a ridiculous moment out of time that really oughtn't to have happened, but I even ended up on the goddamn cover of the magazine. And then a year later, someone in England sent Americana magazine another letter, and they had these figures. And this woman was a little kid when the man came to her house just as the war was beginning and left this trunk with the figures with her family. And she was never allowed to touch them. She was told that he was coming back to get them when the war was over. Well, the war ended and he never came back again. And years later, she didn't know what to do with them. And she saw them, Americana magazine of all things, and wrote them and offered them to me. They're all carved out of wood, believe it or not. I mean, they're so slick, it looks like it could be plastic. But no, it's all made of wood. The workmanship is incredible. I mean, the shoes are shoes. Definitely one of a kind. This isn't a manufactured object. It was obviously done for a ventriloquist who performed with these things. This trunk, they were in this trunk, so they're in incredible condition because they were in the trunk for 50 years. Each of the figures does something special. Well, first of all, can you see what his tongue's doing? They're like, the tongue moves. It's like on a counterweight. Pull a secret string, you can make him smile. And this is Minnie. And what she does is flutter her eyelashes. And her tongue operates the same way as Mickey. Okay, this wall contains a few of the carvings of my dear friend Charles Ponstinkle. And Charles is clearly an absolute genius who is hiding in plain sight. And when I first got the first few carvings, there were these 4 right here on the end. And then they turned into 16. And now they're crawling across the wall and throughout the house. And it's just incredible. I mean, I've done a little sculpting with building up with clay. And the minute you put a little too much and you have to cut away, and you cut away a little too much, you've ruined it. It's gone. This is all cutting away. So one slip and you've cut yourself, you've cut the thing, or you've cut too much away, and you can't put it back again. The level of skill that goes into this is just incredible. Well, no question about it. Of all Charles' carvings, this is by all means his masterpiece. It really is the ultimate, this little Sammy Sneeze by Winsor McKay. And he was at the pinnacle of his powers when he did this. And for those of you who don't know, Little Sammy Sneeze was a McKay character that he did shortly before he did Little Nemo. And the story was always the same storyline. Little Sammy Sneeze had a powerful sneeze, and when he finally did sneeze, everything was destroyed in the wake of it. And so here he is. These are not a group of toys. He's meant to be in the foreground. And this is an entire circus parade on a normal city street. And the power of his sneeze is not only blowing the parade up in the air, but it's actually toppling the buildings. This was a cover of a very rare book, a bound volume of Little Sammy Sneeze comics that dates from about 1903 or 1904. This is sheer works of love and passion. This is all that Charles does, is carve these things, and he doesn't carve them for any purpose other than just the joy of doing them. And he has no desire to own them. He really doesn't mind what happens to them once he's carved them. He just wants to work on the next one. The love that he put into them radiates out of them. That's the only way I can express it. I mean, clearly these are an absolute labor of love. Charles grew up on the comics, and he didn't pick up a penknife till he was like in his mid-40s, and he wanted to see if he could carve something, and he began carving comic characters. He turned out to be a person who's very close to my age by a year, and 1 year my senior. In terms of vim and vigor and energy, years younger than I am, and loved comic characters since he was a kid. And one day just picked up a penknife to see if he could carve something. He had a family of 13 children, and one of his brothers carved birds or something, and so he thought he'd try to carve something too. He was, I think, 43 when he did his first carving. And the rest is history. So for years I didn't know him, but for the last 32 I did. And every year in those 32 years, Charles has come here for a visit, and most of the times with a carving or more or some or many. And he certainly graced my life with all this beauty.